Hello, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm Jay Siano, co-founder, CEO of Sabre Advisors. Sabre is a dominant real estate advisory firm that helps businesses grow across the country. We focus on, as you already know, the fitness and wellness, what I like to call the healthy lifestyle space. We do that in many different ways. My background, I'm 23 years in commercial real estate. I've evolved over those 2 decades in the business from more of a traditional real estate broker into an advisor. I call myself essentially an advisor to game changers. So a lot of what I do is well beyond real estate strategy, but that is the backbone of my career essentially. But having grown with many different brands from their earliest stages, I help folks with a lot more things than just the real estate side. So kind of all things business scaling. Most of you who attended the summit know my quick story, and I'll kind of give that now for context and folks who were not there. So started in the business 2001 locally in New York. Was doing local, mom and pop deals, a nail salon here, a cell phone store there. Had an opportunity to pitch the Starbucks coffee business. Through the faith of God, landed that account and worked with Starbucks for 18 years and learned the ins and outs of the importance of real estate from, I would argue, one of the best real estate, companies around. A lot of the folks at Starbucks came from McDonald's, and I'm sure, anybody who watched the movie that was based off of Ray Kroc's book, Grinding It Out, you understand that McDonald's is very much a real estate company as well. So all of the companies that I had the benefit and the people, more importantly, that I had the benefit of working with and learning from at the earliest stages of my career, kind of shaped the importance of real estate in the overall success of businesses. From there, was traveling, visiting friends from the University of Arizona in Los Angeles, and I discovered a concept called Chipotle. It was around 2003. Ended up bringing Chipotle to New York, designing their initial rollout strategy, first penetration, then rollout strategy for parts of New York. I transitioned from a small retail-only boutique brokerage firm to CB Richard Ellis, the largest commercial real estate brokerage company, in January of 2007. I was really just always grateful for the opportunity that company provided me. It was a home for me in a challenging time for myself. I lost my mother to cancer shortly after graduating college. So I never burned bridges, and I ended up transitioning, but leaving my clients behind. So when I got to when I got to CB Richard Ellis in January of 2007, I had to start cold calling again and finding new opportunities. I called upon an Arizona company called Massage Envy. They connected me to area developers that owned 5 states for Massage Envy. And that was really my first foray outside of New York Metro, and also my first foray into franchising, because Starbucks and Chipotle and the other companies that I was working with previously were corporate. And so I started to really learn how to design not only business scaling and real estate, but also franchising and franchise sales and territories and things of that nature with those folks. Those same gentlemen went on to discover a concept called European Wax Center that had 2 locations at the time, the Cobra Brothers, and they partnered with the Cobra Brothers to turn European Wax Center into a franchise. Help them with the early stages of that. And then ultimately they went on to found Orange Theory Fitness. They're still very close friends of mine. So that sequence of events really helped shape my career. That was all prior to me starting Sabre in February of 2011. And started Sabre because I have a love-hate relationship with the commercial real estate brokerage industry that I'm very vocal about. I have a problem with the fact that I was, as an individual commercial real estate broker, highly incentivized to actually uh, drive up the square footage of deals and drive up the rents in order to collect the highest commissions that I can. I'm not saying I ever did that, but that's how the commissions are based. So it's a very strange way that, I always found it odd that the commercial real estate brokerage industry would get paid by not necessarily doing what's in the best interest of the tenant. And I came up always representing tenants. Full transparency, Sabre represents tenants and landlords, developers, but I work practically 100% on the tenant side. So from my early days with Starbucks and Chipotle, I learned early on how to beat up landlords and how to, do what's in the best interests of my clients. I think I got where I am today because I focus on the long-term approach to everything. Everything to me is relationship driven and reputation driven. And it took me a very long time to get where I am. So it's really important to me that I treat everybody with respect and give them the same, um, guidance and feedback that I would a multi-billion dollar, corporate business. And it's actually more fun that way. I have a lot of fun working with smaller companies, emerging brands, and we spoke. Ann Malum was the keynote for the summit that I'm referring to, and she's been a dear friend and a client for 7 years. She's a good example of a small company that had 7, 8 locations when I first met her in DC Metro, and she told me she wanted to open 100 locations and sell. And I looked at her like she was crazy, but crazy enough to actually do it. And she said she wanted to do that in 5 years. I said, well, I'm just the person to help you do that. And if COVID didn't happen, we would have hit that 5 year mark. But we did hit that. It took a little longer as a result of COVID. But we opened the 100th solid core studio 4 or 5 months ago in Santa Monica, California. And Ann exited very successfully. We still represent solid core nationally. We represent a lot of different brands locally, regionally, and nationally. Some of those brands are Y7, Yoga, obviously Solid Core, Open. We represent the Feel Good Company, which is the founders of Drive Bar on all their brands. The fastest growing brand for them currently is Squeeze Massage, which is also a franchise business. What's interesting is, we've been really, as a result of a lot of hard work and understanding the internal franchising systems for a lot of different businesses over the years, we've been instrumental in helping businesses like Squeeze strengthen their franchise process and really partnering with their franchisees. They don't even really refer to folks as franchisees. It's more their partners, which I think speaks volumes to how they operate. And there's all different types of businesses, whether they're franchised or corporate. And I'm happy to share best practices on really how to get the best possible deals necessary to have a successful business. Oftentimes when I'm introduced to folks, unfortunately, I have to really unwind and put fires out and figure out how to get back to zero before we're able to really build on a firm foundation. I work with a lot of folks, even celebrity trainers that have had bad advisors around them and just bad guidance, with people telling them to do things that they should never do. Very costly things that could put people into personal bankruptcy and things of that nature. Pride myself really on just trying to help people with no expectations in return, and that works really well for a business model. So it's a little bit about myself, a little bit about my background. I would say to go visit Sabre, which is www.sabre.life. I also advise founders of early growth businesses in all things, again, business scaling beyond real estate. You can find more information on my website, which is www.jasonsiano.com or jciano. They both go to the same place. And I'm happy to help. Several people have followed up since I was on the panel, and with lots of questions about personal guarantees, other hot topics, and uh, I've been able to get back to almost everybody in a timely fashion. Even if I also, I have to mention that I am conflicted out, from working with certain companies based on, my clients. But that doesn't mean I can't help people. So I do that regardless of whether or not there might be a conflict as far as representation goes. First off, I don't like generalizing, all landlords the same way I shouldn't generalize all commercial real estate brokers. So I have to start there. Um, but listen, landlords are very smart, and they're in the business to make money. The same way that everybody who owns a business should be in the business to make money. There are really, really awesome landlords that look at their relationship with their tenants as partnerships, and really want to help tenants be as successful as possible. And then there's scumbags that own businesses that will almost intentionally put you out of business, so they can get their space back with the improvements that you've made, and rent it for more rent to an unqualified person or anybody on the planet. There's everything in between, right? So I think, again, obviously, based on the fact that I am almost always representing a tenant, I do look at the landlord as the devil because I'm playing to win, right? So, but in order for me to win, it has to be the most fair deal where both parties are a little uncomfortable. But obviously, I ended up a little ahead on behalf of the tenant. So I think that's a good generalization and an overview on landlords. But I will go a step further. So when I'm designing a strategy, depending on what the business is and what the growth needs are on an annual basis and how much geography we're planning to cover, we take all things into consideration, and I'd be lying if I said that I didn't avoid specific landlords. So, and I say that to say that if a business owner really needs, let's just say, a certain amount of TI or certain variables in order to make a deal happen, or the deal can't happen, I know that there's certain landlords that are off the table, right out of the gate, right? So again, based on the national nature of our business and the fact that we are active currently in every market across the US, we've done deals with, I would say, the far majority of big landlords everywhere, the mid-sized landlords as well, and a good chunk of the, mom and pops, but definitely not as many throughout the rest of the country outside of, New York Metro. Because again, we have more of a traditional brokerage presence in New York Metro, and it's where, myself and my partners are all located. So we have a lot of history, obviously, in that geography. So the one most important thing is to be, I think, let's take a page from Anne's book. So, when I first started working with Anne and making major requests for things in our standard letter of intent template, there were a bunch of things that I thought were almost unreasonable asks. And, that's having worked with brands like Starbucks and Chipotle that are known for, asking for the world from a landlord and getting it. But with Anne, she was asking for more than Starbucks, on these early solid core locations. And as a result of her pushing back, with me about what's reasonable and what's not, we ended up really getting more than I expected just by asking for a lot of different things right out of the gate. And to that point, really, it didn't matter to her if we, even didn't necessarily always look good for asking for the world, so to speak, right? Because ultimately, somebody can only say no, right? And if you do ask, and actually, if you start to really lean in on things that become deal breakers, you'll ultimately realize that, it really puts the leverage in your court. Now, solid core at 7, 8 units obviously had a different amount of leverage than solid core at 30, 50, 70, 100 plus. But at the same time, we never approached it that way. And I think that is very eye opening. And it's also why, our business model evolved, and solid core, a lot of the learnings through solid core, shaped how we work today for our clients. And, we don't self-service throughout the entire country. So we bring in best in class local partners throughout the country that are trained and vetted to negotiate the way we negotiate. And it's funny because a lot of times it's the same thing that, happened with me early solid core with Ann. Our local broker partners will say, this landlord doesn't do these things, so on and so forth. And they end up telling you no a lot of times before you even ask, because brokers kind of get lazy and complacent, and they'll tell you why you can't do things more often than not. And it's not because they don't mean well. It's because, they've been told no by those parties on numerous occasions. But one of my business partners used to always use the term, we should never be judge and jury. And that reminds you that you should always start a new deal fresh, and never like take those things that, you've learned previously, and assume that they're relevant for the deal you're working on tomorrow, right? So I think that's the most important thing, is really not being afraid to ask, and also not being afraid to to dig in on things with the right guidance from, hopefully a professional that, understands where to push and where to maybe hold back. The first position for any landlord is going to be, the entity with the most for them to sink their teeth into, essentially, right? So, corporate guarantees are really only relevant when the corporation is worth a lot, right? So typically, early franchises, a landlord will ask for a corporate guarantee. I don't think I've ever seen the parent company of a franchise corporately guarantee a lease. I have discussed it. I think that honestly, I think early F45, there was some corporate guarantees for some of the first deals where corporate, felt comfortable to kind of back early franchisees for a very limited amount of time, call it, 12 months, possibly 24 months. And then from there, the landlord is going to kind of go down, from the corporate guarantee to personal guarantees from all parties and spouses. So you can't play any games kind of moving things around. And, the days of a full term guarantee are, I mean, I see people that, again, don't get proper guidance. I see people sign full term guarantees because they don't know any better. And I think where most people, end up in this position is by using their cousin who's a attorney who has no idea, how to negotiate these types of deals. I see a lot of people being penny wise, dollar foolish with the wrong attorneys. It's one thing to have, a broker that doesn't know what they're doing, but if your lease is a major liability and you need to treat it that way. So, it's well worth engaging a real estate attorney for $2,000-3,000 to negotiate that lease for you. You're going to save a lot of money in the long run, because the better ones will steer you clear of signing a full term guarantee. From there, most landlords today are willing to work with what's called a good guy clause, limited guarantee with a good guy clause, or a rolling guarantee, which essentially is typically anywhere from 2 to 3 years of a personal guarantee with a 12-month rolling thereafter. So essentially, you have to, obviously you're responsible for the rent for the term of that personal guarantee. Let's call it 2 years, which is more customary. Or we typically will fight tooth and nail to not go beyond 2 years. I like to really fight as much as possible for 1 year, but you have to realize that you're giving things up if you're going to stand on that 1 year guarantee, because a landlord doesn't have the same amount of opportunity to recoup their investment in the event you could terminate after year one and they're only getting another 12-month penalty from you, when they have to pay a real estate broker fee. They have to obviously put some money into the space depending on its condition. And then if you're asking for free rent or you're asking for TI, they can't amortize that over 1 year, over 2 years, right? So that ultimately becomes somebody's specific negotiating, and what's important to them, essentially, right? So similarly to how a landlord is not going to be able to go to a bank and get financing for a deal that doesn't have a corporate guarantee, or a substantial personal guarantee. So new construction and things of that nature that can come more into play, where the landlord truly does need more in order to make your deal, or the bank is not really going to get behind them. Again, when you're asking them to write a check and things of that nature, it's way more relevant. Personal preference. TI is something that works really well for, again, larger companies. Um, would prefer to have a check, and because there's economies of scale for their vendors and things of that nature, so their money's going to go a little bit further. Smaller business owners oftentimes would prefer the landlord to do more work, and push off the rent commencement as much as possible. And then it's just more customary. There's not going to be a landlord, uh, for the most part. I'd be a little concerned about a landlord willing to write a big check for a newer business that's not corporate in nature, with little to no personal guarantee. If you could find those deals, let me know. I think that's either the landlord is absolutely idiotic, or there's possibly something there that doesn't meet the eye, which would be something to be concerned about. So, I think the majority of folks are going to end up getting more free rent, unless they're, a more sizable business that can really command more, and has a brand that attracts additional co-tenancy to a center. The more that you grow, the better that the brand is that you're a part of. If it's a franchise, um, there's different levers to pull. The personal guarantees don't, they're pretty customary, but the TI and things of that nature are typically tied to a per square foot number. So you can kind of, back into that. It's going to it all ties back to the CapEx, right? So the capital expenditures, the build out costs, the things of that nature. So, and it's always good to also have some ammunition. So if you're able to do some of that up front and actually, have a contractor pull together, a proposal essentially that might be a little higher than it actually costs. I didn't say that, but something that's going to show that you're really spending a lot of money on the space. Obviously the landlord's going to know that if you're building out a 5,000 square foot business versus a 2,000 2,500 square foot business, it's going to cost substantially more. Yes. I mean, listen, your lease is binding, so it just transitions with the property. So, but having said that, I would suggest that it's in your best interest to get to know your new landlord, as best as possible. And then you're probably not going to be able to like retrade things mid deal unless your business is suffering. If your business is actually suffering and you can come in and prove that and sit down with your landlord, oftentimes they will want to help you because they don't want the space back unless they want the space back. So, there's always opportunities, but you're not pulling the wool over a sophisticated landlord's eyes where it's like, we're doing really well, we're netting 50K a month, and let's go in and pretend like we're struggling, and try to, that stuff doesn't work. Um, but if you really do need the assistance, and you have the right approach to the landlord, they are typically willing to help. Yeah, it's interesting because actually my team posted a piece of micro content from the panel today, which was about don't be afraid to close a studio. And I have that conversation a lot. And I'm currently having that conversation a lot because, when we're looking at, I'm not really answering your question, but I think it's an opportunity to kind of talk about, again, macro, everything's, unless you're literally looking to open one location and stay at one location, you always have to be strategizing your portfolio, right? And I think I used this example on the panel, when Starbucks um, had the opportunity to close a bunch of stores. They were getting, I think it was probably 2000 in the downturn of '08. So they had a bunch of underperforming stores. Every brand has underperforming units. And oftentimes you have underperformers that are ones you thought were going to be amazing, and you have ones that you thought were going to do okay that are, doing really well. There's no, it's an art and a science. I was going to say there's no science to it. There's definitely science to it, but it's an art and a science. And you always have to be looking for opportunities to optimize your portfolio. What do I mean by that? With Y7, we were able to get out of a bunch of underperforming leases during the pandemic. And it's not to say that we didn't need to, we really did, because everybody was hurting obviously during the pandemic, and it affected different geographies differently, but everybody's business was really substantially impacted. But smart people will take advantage of opportunities in those times to get rid of, not just studios or stores that are not profitable, but ones that are not performing the way that you wanted them to perform. Right. So we're always looking to optimize a portfolio, because I think everybody here knows how painful it is to try to grow something that is not, that is not not, growing the way that you thought it would, and you're expending a lot of energy, in a negative way, essentially, just trying to, to keep the business afloat, and so on and so forth. So, I do recommend that you really think about, what going to a landlord and having conversations about the potential that you would close the studio, and again, if you could afford to, based on the guarantees that you have and things of that nature. A lot of the bigger clients that I have, they couldn't care less if they have to pay a year plus penalty in order to not operate a studio that's just not worth their time, right? A little different for a big business than it is for somebody smaller where it is painful. Very important. So you always want your exclusive use clause to be as, I I have a different philosophy on this. Different modalities in proximity that are strong could end up helping your business. So, but it's always good to have leverage, right? So when you're negotiating a deal, you want to get as much from a landlord as possible. So in the event they might need something from you in the future, and that's when you could cash in. So if we were able to negotiate a very broad exclusive use clause, which said we are the only fitness operator in this shopping center, and they happen to agree to that, which obviously, 99% of landlords are smart enough to not agree to that. Then when they come back and they want to put in another fitness concept, they're going to come to you with hat in hand, and you're going to be able to say, why would I let in another fitness concept? And they're going to say, well, we hear that it actually might boost your sales and so on and so forth. We think that they'd be a good co-tenant for you. And you could say, absolutely not. And then, from there you have the leverage, right? So now you could start thinking about what you want in return. And we do that all the time. You have to realize that you are a CEO, you're running a business, even if you love what you do every day and you look at it as a hobby because you love the people that you're surrounded by and all the things, you have to realize that if you're not running your business like a business and you're not, really smart and capitalizing, in those opportunities, you just won't get as far. It's that simple. There's still a very substantial amount of vacancy. Certain markets are obviously way more impact than other markets. Every landlord or broker that I saw yesterday, they all have the same story. Oh, it's back, it's stabilized. They're very optimistic because they need to be, because the value of their properties are predicated on that optimism. And if they're not conveying that optimism to a prospective tenant, the tenant's going to try to take advantage, right? So, markets like um, Midtown are really, really majorly impacted. The daytime population's just not even close to where it used to be, and you really have more of a 3-day work week. In those taller high-rise office buildings, folks are not in the office on Mondays for the most part, or Fridays, right? So midweek is busier. And again, each market is different. In Soho, very vibrant, rents have definitely stabilized. Once you get into markets like Flatiron and Chelsea that are obviously extremely popular for fitness, it's also known as the Fit Iron for that reason. Everything is definitely stabilized. The rents are substantially back up, and there's people in the better pockets that are basically fighting over space. So that is going on. But overall, there's still good opportunities out there. Where we work with a lot of brands that are trying to get as creative as possible and take, a vestibule. With Orange Theory, you see it quite a bit in the city too. They did a great job of taking ground floor vestibule and going down. That's very helpful also from a sound standpoint. So it works for many different reasons. And if you're looking at, call it 150 a foot on the ground floor, you're looking at 65, 70 foot on the lower level. And again, I'm just generalizing, but that blended rent is going to be a lot more affordable for a fitness type use, because at a certain, there's a threshold of where each category can pay rent and and still have a solid business. In the suburbs, I always use 10,000 a month gross as a benchmark. That was always Orange Theory's benchmark in the suburbs. And I oftentimes, like, I passed a burn boot camp recently on a very high rent street in the suburbs in New York, and they were just opening for business. And I literally drove past and was like, they're not going to last, because just knowing where they located, there's no way they could afford the rent they're paying, because they are in a sizable space that is, probably in the 60s, with extras that are 10 or 15 per square foot. So I know those economics don't work just based on, what I do. And unfortunately, they just closed about a month and a half ago. So, again, these are things that are straight up business decisions that, the individual person opening their own business wouldn't know what that rent threshold is. And again, this is a generalization, but for a Orange Theory type business, 10,000 is that threshold in the suburbs, obviously substantially higher in New York City. Typically we're looking in like the 25,000 to 30,000 range on a monthly rent in New York City in that same category. There are, listen, there's pitfalls to going on second floors and lower levels also, you know, and obviously like cutting corners on sound attenuation is a challenge. I don't like to, I think the Soul Cycles and the Barrys of the world, where they build the box within a box, and spend a substantial amount of money, to mitigate any of those issues. Every brand that I've worked with, does not subscribe to spending, that type of money on sound attenuation. Um, However, I've definitely been in the room for conversations about issues with sound, and vibrations and things of that nature. So I think, my again, I think it's really important to build your space out where it looks really expensive but isn't. I think that's another solid core tip, like it's not necessary to overspend. And another pro tip is be very intentional about your space. Maximize every square foot of your space. Do not take additional space because, oh, maybe I'll put some soft seating here and throw a cafe over there. That stuff never works. And you end up making it more difficult to operate. You don't have additional revenue that's worthwhile almost every time. There are some cases where, I do know companies that do well out of their juice bar or their cafe. But 9 times out of 10, it's not the case. And if you can afford to pay more on a per square foot basis, if you're optimizing space, not deals that I've done, but my clients' deals that predate me, we've had to relocate as a result of sound. Um, so it's a thing. I mean, it's definitely a thing, but going into it, you should be doing your homework up front with every space. You should be doing test fits, in advance, just laying the space out, having a sound engineer, in the space just to check it out. You have to invest some money up front to make sure you're not getting yourself into a situation. And if you're on the fence with certain things, go to the landlord and ask for more. Listen, there's a um residential unit above us. I'm concerned about that being an issue. And sometimes the landlords are less concerned. And you're like, well, listen, then that's on you, so you need to put additional soundproofing in the ceiling for us. Like, we're not going to spend, so you really need to be mindful of the circumstances in advance. And I always say, don't fall in love with real estate. It's very difficult not to. We're all guilty of it. You find something that you think's really special, and sometimes you convince yourself to agree to things that you shouldn't as a result of that. But again, if you're negotiating several deals in one market, you don't necessarily, you don't put all your eggs in one basket. So you don't feel like you're losing, all hope if you don't end up making that one deal. So I always tell my clients that you're either in the real estate business or the fitness business, and you have to kind of pick and choose what's the priority for you, because and again, it's different from market to market. I could tell you in anywhere in New York Metro, you can't justify the expense of buying a property to put your fitness business in there unless you're a real estate investor and you have holdings, and that's the business you're in, and you also happen to be in the fitness business. There are definitely circumstances, of course, outside of New York where you could very easily afford a property and put your fitness business in. And I would just say, if you can do that in the right market, in the right location within that market, you should do that. Typically, that's a lot more difficult to line up. And then the timing of the cadence and the sequence of events of tying up a building, closing on it, and opening up your business is another challenge that you'll have to mitigate. But I think if you could pull that off, more power to you. But again, you're going to sacrifice somewhere. I was taught to find the best possible opportunity in the target markets. And so everything that we do at Sabre and everything I've ever done is always like, we look at everything from 10,000 feet and we develop the macro strategy and design the entire program essentially for saturation, right? So if I'm looking at a specific market, I'm laying out and designing the strategy for the next 10 years, and where we're going to locate. And if you don't do it that way, and you drop a location here and you drop a location here, you might forego an awesome market that is somewhere, that would cannibalize too much of those existing locations. And that's how the pros do it. That's how Starbucks and Chipotle and, all of those folks are not just driving by, spaces with signs in the window. I think that it's a very creative way to, get into space. But operations, needs to be aligned in order to do it successfully, which I think is just another challenge. So, I personally believe that each each brand should have its own identity and exclusive access essentially. So one's not relying so much on the other. Um, but we're having conversations with so many different fit lab, type concepts that are taking larger chunks of space, and want to have common areas that are shared and shared amenities and locker rooms and all of that fun stuff. So I think it is going to be something that becomes more popular. Um, I think there's pros and cons to that. However, I would say, if there's a brand that I admire on some level that I know is going to bring a substantial amount of traffic to a space and I can capitalize on that, let's go. I happen to really like, the secondary and tertiary markets. I'm building a very interesting spreadsheet of like very markets people never would even think to go into that have extremely high performing fitness concepts. I love that. I think that, honestly, like that's how I would build, depending on, again, what the brand is. But I think the most opportunity is in those markets where you have less competition overall. Just right, because any fitness on some level could be considered competition, right? If I have the option of going to this fitness concept or this fitness, if there's only one or two games in town, so to speak, you're going to get a lot more market share. Now we also realize there's probably going to be a lot less population density, but per capita, you're going to be performing better. So I love those opportunities. Again, Solid Core is a great example of how we developed a two-tier strategy. Ann and I early on saw that as a major opportunity where we could go into, New York City and then, go into Pittsburgh or North Dakota or, other markets that Carmel, Indiana, or, other markets that, maybe folks wouldn't have considered it as early as we were, but it was really also important to, you have to operate these things. I get involved in a lot of early, stage concepts where we have two locations in New York Metro, two under development, and the founders talking about a great opportunity in San Francisco. And I'm like, last time I checked, that wasn't very convenient to operate, right? So there's um that makes no sense to me. It never will. I think you have to really be mindful of how to leverage your existing brand recognition, especially, solid core, early solid core, and never spent a dime on marketing. So any new market that we opened, we would we would open up and would be like, why is it taking slow to ramp? And because nobody knows who solid core is. And we didn't tell anybody we were coming. What do you mean? Why is it? So, it's funny because you could still have great success. You just have to be a little bit more patient, and do the right things. So there's a lot of differences between those three tiers that you mentioned. And there's opportunities in all of them, but the opportunities are unique and they're case by case. It's more, if somebody was talking to me about a spin studio versus a Pilates studio versus a yoga studio or a hit, you know, workout, I'd have different answers. Because I kind of know who the more dominant ones in each modality are, in each geography. And I travel the country constantly looking for, the more unique, interesting brands that I can help scale. Going into those tier one, cities that make a lot of sense that Barry's and Soul Cycle are in, just to kind of simplify it. Versus, again, versus the suburbs, in Pittsburgh or, those so tier one being, those again, like flagship markets essentially that the bigger brands are in. Nashville, right? Like you have your Barry's there, you have your Soul Cycle. Austin, those types of markets are really obviously hot markets today for it's funny because those every brand there, it's like the same five markets that they tell me they want to be in, right? So I think even though Nashville, 5 years ago, there might have been a lot of opportunity and not a lot of competition. When you have every concept saying we want to go to Nashville, it's something to be mindful of. No, we would never. Solid Core was very smart to really not stray much from their prototype. That has since changed. There are studios that are double the size of typical studios. 250 Bowery in New York City is 4,500 square feet, with 2 rows of Svetlanas. But based on the economics, we were able to make sense of that, and we also wanted to test that out to see, how what the feel of the class would be, when we had that many megaformers. Yes, that, opening a business is a very important long-term decision, and you should really do your homework in advance and surround yourself with the right people.